We're back on our bullshit! Hi everybody! The last videos that were on this channel a minute ago, were a year's review of books, and that was a lot. And then there was a big break, and then the crazy year happened. And now the crazy year is almost kind of sort of over. And so we're gonna do a quarterly review of things I've read, just so I can talk about some fun books I've been reading and share my thoughts. And because it's fun to have a creative outlet now that the bad times are ending, mostly. Anyways, so yeah, these are books I've read so far in 2021. This is volumes 5 and 6 of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Really, all I want to say about them now is that they're really, really good. I would love to do a video talking about why Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is really good. I feel like in the past, I'd always just heard it's good. You should read it because it's Alan Moore. And yeah, I just don't know if I've ever seen anyone really break down why it's awesome. And 5 and 6 were definitely a home run and a great end to the series. And there's a reason people have been trying to write like him for forever. I got these for Christmas. This is all of the Ursula K. Le Guin sci-fi novels in her Hainish series. I read a couple of these already, and I haven't super dug into these since Christmas, but I've read a couple of the short stories, well, 1.5 short stories. I apparently have a problem reading fiction. Who knew? The two I've been working on. I read Vaster Than Empires and More Slow. That's the one. Vaster Than Empires and More Slow was just about a crew within her sci-fi universe, which is, if you haven't read it, is very Star Trek adjacent. But it's about a crew going and exploring a world that is nothing but forest. Spoilers? Question mark. It's kind of obvious. The forest is sentient, and all the plant life is connected in one big neural network, and one of the crew members has empathic abilities and basically bonds with the forest. It was good. It was kind of old. I don't know. I feel like there are Star Trek episodes that have hit very, very similar themes, and obviously Avatar has done the whole living forest thing. It's not necessarily new ideas reading in 2021, but I still really, really, really love reading Le Guin. And then the second story I was reading by her that I'm actually in the middle of, it's called The Day Before the Revolution, and it is a prequel to The Dispossessed, which is my favorite novel that I've read by her. It's just like a prequel, hundreds of years prequel, following the leader of the revolution that started the main planet in The Dispossessed. I don't know, it's just been fun to have these. I'm really excited to dig into these more and read more Le Guin because the worlds she created are just really, really fun. We're gonna talk about Strange Rights by Isabella Burton. I heard about this book on the Know Your Enemy podcast, and it sounded really interesting, so I got it. And about 2/3 of the way through the book, I just wasn't vibing with it. So I went back and re-listened to the podcast, and my thoughts after re-listening to the podcast was, wow, that sounds like a really interesting book still. It's too bad that's not what I'm reading. So the basic premise of the book is it's covering kind of a lot of modern New Age religious movements and kind of how they all overlap. The phrase she uses a lot is that a lot of them are intuitional versus institutional, which I think that's part of the reason I didn't vibe with the book for a long time, is because my stupid brain kept on thinking of intuitional as emotional and irrational, when obviously if she's contrasting it with institutional, she really just means that on some level you're trusting yourself over institutions and whatever's been written, experiential, and that doesn't necessarily mean irrational. I don't know, but it took me way too long in the book to click that in my brain. In the original interview that really turned me on to this book, I really liked that she was neutral to positive leaning about a lot of these new religious movements. Within the book itself, as I was reading it, she seemed neutral to negative on a lot of them. And I think it was her just trying to show the full breadth of a lot of the groups, but she kind of, I guess, chose the weakest elements to highlight. She chose the weakest and strongest elements of a lot of these ideas to highlight, but the weak ones just kind of bored me. It was an interesting book. I liked the end. I like some of the concepts that modern society has failed us spectacularly in giving us rights or just communities to belong in that we want to succeed with. I just wish she focused maybe more on the failures that brought us to where we are and not the failures of people trying to move forward, if that makes sense. Yeah, it was an okay book. I read Unions Renewed Building Power in the Age of Finance by Alice Martin and Annie Quick. Basic quick idea of this book is basically that labor unions aren't going to cut it in our modern day. Already the union movement is kind of lacking and we should rebuild unions, but as we do it, basically they say that, finance runs everything anymore. Makes me think about, they didn't reference Toys R Us specifically, but if anyone knows what happens to Toys R Us, where basically a bunch of people bought a bunch of shares in Toys R Us, took out massive loans and paid out that money to themselves, sold off a bunch of Toys R Us's assets and pocketed the money, and once all that was done, basically resold their stocks and were able to make a quick buck while crashing the company. Basically, your traditional labor union doesn't really help there because, hey, we're gonna go on strike if you don't treat us better. Doesn't work when the shareholders are basically saying, we don't need this company to be successful anyways. We're just fleecing it for all it's worth, and then it can crash for all we care. So basically, as we're rebuilding unions, they argue in unions renewed, we need more things like debtors unions or tenant unions, and we need to just be really smart as we're going against finance, and like a modern labor movement has to attack capital on multiple fronts because the workplace isn't the main place where the working class is getting screwed right now, or isn't the only place. And so as we rebuild the union and the labor movement, which we absolutely need to do, we need to be smart and be efficient on multiple fronts. Yeah, it was a fun little book. It was pretty good. Before I get to more books, the main audiobook I listened to this year. So I really wanted to read Marx's Capital, which this is not it. I'll get to this. I was checking our library to see if they would have that on audiobook, which they didn't. But I decided I really wanted to read some classic nonfiction. I don't know if that's actually considered a thing, but yeah, classic nonfiction anyways. So I listened to On the Origin of Species. It was really interesting to listen to Darwin's ideas like in the original book. Main thought, knowing, being raised by a biology teacher, being interested in evolutionary theory, thinking I understand biology pretty well. My main thought was just like Darwin needed Mendel like really, really bad. All of the things that were confusing him, or that he would have to spend a lot of time building a case for how heritability worked. Once you have Mendel, it explains all of these things. I didn't realize that Darwin still was a Lamarckian. He came up with the idea of natural selection, but the variation that natural selection was working on, he thought of in a Lamarckian way, where parents would do things throughout their lives to strengthen themselves and then pass that on to the offspring, and that's what the natural selection was working on. It was just interesting to read the ideas in their original time, see what he got right, see what he got wrong, and see what he was missing, because he was missing Mendel. And it makes me really sad that he never got to read Mendel's papers, because it makes a huge difference and everything clicks once you have genetics in play. That was my one classic nonfiction that I read. And then also I read Marx's Capital Illustrated by David Smith and Phil Evans. It's an illustrated Das Kapital. I think at this point I probably just need to bite the bullet and read the full 3 volumes of 1,000 pages a piece or whatever it is of Das Kapital. And that'll be a project for someone just getting introduced to the ideas. This is a great starter. I think I've just spent enough time in leftist economic theory that I didn't get a whole lot from this. I think it's probably time for the real thing, but that's terrifying. And these are the last 2 books. I really want to talk about these as a pair, but Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation by Silvia Federici. Basically a book about the witch trials and the colonization of the Americas, and how they fed back and forth between each other, and basically how that helped the start of capitalism. A lot of American history, you'll learn that, the ruling class at any time in Americas or under capitalism, had to make laws to keep oppressed groups apart. They had to make laws to really keep the indentured servants away from the slaves, because they both realized they were being screwed by the same people, and if you let them work together, they're gonna become best friends and comrades and rise up against you. So they had to make laws to separate those groups. And basically Caliban and the Witch pushes that way back into, the birth of capitalism, and talks about the witch hunts basically breaking the working class along gender lines. It was a really interesting book. Just kind of really thinking about that transition from people working the land because it was their land and because that was what humans did, and just kind of doing things because they wanted to people becoming tools of the capitalists. And kind of the idea is even that like we went through that transition where we were making everything rational, and Descartes kind of talked about the body being the tool of your rational mind, and so people even kind of disrespecting our bodies, going from being like a core part of our being to just a tool that our rational mind is using. Yeah, same thing with like plants or animals that at one point we were kind of taking care of, and oh no, that's just a machine that you raise for food. It was especially interesting when I read with this last book, which I absolutely loved, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The subtitle kind of says it all: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. I adored this book a lot. She kind of jumps all over the place in this book. Some of it's really autobiographical, some of it is very much just delving into like Native American philosophy or mythology, sort of, you would say. Mythology's not a great word, but philosophy, teachings, spiritual beliefs, and then also jumping into like her studies as a scientist. I guess what I really love about this book is she kind of, at the best moments, she's able to talk in like several of those registers at once, like simultaneously have a really good just ecology point that's grounded in science, but still speak in kind of a, yeah, like a spiritual register. My absolute favorite two things I learned in this book, it was in 2 chapters back to back. She talked about a couple plants that are actually under harvested. One of them being black ash. There we go. So she talks about black ash, which people would harvest the bark from it and use it to weave baskets, and how there is some evidence that that has actually been under harvested, or that people harvesting the bark actually kind of cleared space around it that let saplings grow. And then the titular sweetgrass. She actually goes in detail about a study that basically showed that humans harvesting it was actually helping it grow. A lot of us have this ecology mindset where like humans are always the invasive species and are always the most destructive element in the environment. But I mean, we're animals too, we're part of nature, so why can't we have a symbiotic relationship? Because we know that diversity is very helpful in a lot of environments, and why can't humans be part of that diversity? I'm gonna be thinking about this book for a long time. I actually listened to this book on audiobook. I have not actually read this. I bought it afterwards because I want to reread it. I want to share it with everyone. I learned a lot from this book. I like the idea of people like being a part of nature and just being good citizens with all peoples, even not human peoples. This was just really fun to read back to back with Caliban and the Witch, because Caliban and the Witch, yeah, especially when it talked about the colonization of the Americas. Even when it talked about Europe, it talked about, you know, the destruction of native knowledge, kind of taking all of these systems that didn't fit with European Christianity at the time and kind of, you know, beating them out of existence until we had just this super rationalist mindset left, that kind of everything was a tool for the king, basically. Your body was a tool for your mind. You yourself were a tool for your landlord or for your boss, and everyone was just a tool for everyone else. The natives were just the tools for the Europeans, like, you know, really horrible shit. Then reading like the systems that they were trying to destroy but couldn't, and like going back to some of those beliefs that they weren't able to destroy, and that hopefully will help lead us out of the mess that we're in right now. So yeah, that's what I've read so far in 2021. Hope you learned something. I don't really have a sign off, but bye!